You know, I think it's time for a new build on this channel, and the best part is, I've almost completed it. Now let me explain why this car is so awesome and why it's become my latest passion project. And to do that, I need to introduce you to my son Theo. This is Theo. He's almost 2 years old now. Like your average kid, he loves chocolate chip cookies, watching Sesame Street with his mom, and he's an absolute freak about cars. Like, no joke, when he's grumpy and I want to cheer him up, I simply go to YouTube and I search for Golf R32 exhaust sound videos, and he loves it. However, unlike most kids, Theo has pretty substantial muscle weakness throughout his entire body and was recently diagnosed with a form of muscular dystrophy. So he can't walk or crawl yet, and even sitting up for extended periods of time is pretty exhausting for him. So, to combat all this, Theo puts in a ton of work, both time and energy, with professional physical therapists, and tons of hours at home doing the same thing with mom and dad. And it's paying off. He's doing really, really well. But he's almost 2 now, and he should be out exploring and controlling what he's seeing and where he's going, and every once in a while taking a break just to have fun. And that is where this car comes in. So what makes this car so special? Well, it's simply a low-cost ride-on car that's been adapted to fit Theo where he's currently at. The main adaptations are a more supportive seat and harness and a low-pressure throttle control that's activated with his hands instead of his foot. Although this specific configuration was designed by Theo and I to fit him, the idea is not our own and one that we found while searching the internet for mobility options. The concept of modifying affordable ride-on cars for children with disabilities has been made obtainable to many by Go Baby Go and its founder, Dr. Cole Galloway. I reached out to the organization, and Dr. Galloway reached out to me himself and shared his time with me for a Zoom meeting to walk me through the basics and shared with me the questions I should be asking when planning this build to accommodate Theo's needs. He also really pushed me to build this car for pure enjoyment for Theo and not for any type of therapy. So after that, I got to planning by identifying the basic requirements for this car. The first thing was a supportive seat that removed the effort of sitting upright for long periods of time. And the second was a hand-triggered start and stop functionality requiring very minimal pressure. Then it came time to choose the donor car or starter car that I was going to adapt to work for this build. There are a ton of options out there, so identifying what your needs are within those is pretty important. Now, I knew I wanted a 6-volt model instead of the optional 12-volt models because they're a little slower, and this is going to be Theo's first car. Also, I knew I'd be using this car in tight spaces around the house and outside, so I wanted one that had a 0 turn radius. Knowing these factors, I went to Facebook Marketplace and picked up a car for just $50. Then I started cutting and building. Alright, so this step was probably a little unnecessary, but it's how I like to start all projects, and that's tearing everything apart so I know how it works. So the first thing that I started was building the seat. I didn't get the full frame construction, but all I did was measure Theo and how tall he was and the width of his shoulders so that way I could build an estimated frame size. And it was important for me and for Theo to make sure that it looked as much like a real racing seat as possible. Building a custom seat like this isn't a typical part of a Go Baby Go build, but since Theo has a tough time sitting up for a long period of time, it was a really important task to get right, and I wanted to make sure the harness would hold him in place since if he hit something, I didn't want him falling out of the car. Once I test fit the straps and got everything fitted, I then wanted to put a little added comfort in there, so I bought some foam from your standard fabric store, something that was heat moldable, and formed it to the seat, cut it using some razor blades, and just took my best guess to get it right. I also laid in some seating foam in there for a little added comfort. Next it came time to fit the seat to the car. I made some rough measurements, scribbled out some pathways, and I started to cut. Obviously, I bought a really inexpensive car knowing that I could run into some issues and may have to restart, but luckily for me, I got it right on the first try. Now that I had the seat in place, it came time to mess with some different control options. I bought a button off of Amazon and used some PVC I had laying around, wired it up, and started to experiment with if it was going to be usable for Theo. I obviously didn't know yet, and Theo hadn't had a chance to try it. After testing out this configuration, I just knew that it wasn't going to work for Theo. The pressure it took to push the button was too much, so I decided to rethink the entire process. And part of that was coming to the realization that Theo wasn't going to be able to really steer this vehicle just yet, so I threw that out the window and just focused on letting him be able to drive it, and I would help him steer. So I ended up removing the switch that was inside the button I purchased and made a really simple foam touchpad that would trigger that switch. Once I got it wired up, I figured I would give Theo a test drive. Good job, buddy! So I considered that a success, so now it came time to permanently affix the seat to the car. I did this by putting a steel rod underneath the seat to give it some added support, some PVC pipes to get the spacing that I needed, and then using a couple screws to fasten it to the body. Now I had the car for the most part complete, but it came time to reroute the wires so that way they weren't just hanging out. I wired them through the front trunk and then under the body and to the back where the battery was located. Here is Theo's first official test drive. And that's it. Now Theo is ready to roll. Good job, buddy. You're Chris. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, I'd love to share with you that Theo, his little sister, his mother, and I will all be participating in the Muscle Walk. It's a virtual fundraiser to fund muscular dystrophy research. We'll be participating as Team Theo, and if you're interested in supporting us and the MDA, you can make a donation to our team using the link in the description below. Theo and I would really appreciate your support. And finally, if you're interested in building an adapted vehicle for a child with special needs or a child who just wants to get behind the wheel of a car sooner than later, I 1, totally recommend it, and 2, Theo and I would love to help you out with any tips, suggestions, or ideas. Feel free to contact us via the comments below. And if you're in Michigan, feel free to reach out. We may even be willing to hook up with you in person to help you out. Overall, we consider this project a huge success, and Theo and I had a ton of fun working on it and even more fun driving it. And we plan to make many more of these cars in the very near future. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to stay tuned on future updates.